We're now live.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, it's all working.
It's all working.
We're fine. Yeah. So we'll just we're live now, but we'll just give it 1 second just to. Okay, we'll make a start. Okay, everyone, very warm welcome to our second live stream, which we are using as one of our final steps in our Developing Cultural Intelligence for Leadership MOOC. It's been great to hear and to read a lot of your comments over the last couple of weeks in terms of the course itself and the content, and great to see how much that you're taking away from the experience. Today is one of our last opportunities to come together as a full group, and a really interesting opportunity to pose some of your final unanswered questions on our subject matter. So I'm just going to hand over to Julia now shortly, just for a quick introduction and welcome, and then we have a couple of questions from learners who haven't been able to make it this morning, but equally for yourselves, please do feed in your questions into the comments section below as well, and we'll try to answer as many of those as we can. So, Julia, can I hand over to you?
So as Dave says, it is the final day as far as I know. Please forgive me, I'm at home. I have an appalling cold, and I don't normally sound quite as gruff as this. I'm sitting in my study, and the wonders of modern technology means I didn't have to cry out because of a cold. We had a live stream yesterday that was great fun. There were lots of interesting questions, most of which I didn't, to be honest, know necessarily the answers to, so I hope I was helpful. But this is the second one, and I look forward to hearing all your questions and thoughts. Over to you, Dave.
Sorry, we had one question which we didn't get a chance to look at yesterday, from Christina, and that question was, what sort of examples are useful to give to corporate managers to convince them of the importance of CQ in global leadership? Oftentimes they will say things like, we're already an international company, we have a lot of employees who've worked abroad. So what advice would you offer?
Advice to, I think probably you know, as you wander around the world and talk to large corporates, I think that even as little as 10 years ago, people were still very much being recruited for a set of skills that met a certain set of problems. As they progressed in their careers, those skills, both technical skills and leadership skills, were honed and specialized and effective. I think nowadays you're recruiting much more for the kinds of leaders who can address problems that didn't exist only 2 years ago. You're asking for an adaptability, a breadth of knowledge, a flexibility, and an ability to predict what's going to happen that is very different. You can really only do that if you are out in the world and talking to people who are not full of the same skills as you and the same knowledge as you and seeing things through the same eyes as you. Truth is that you can be in a global company with masses of people who are like that and actually learn almost nothing from them because you don't have the cultural intelligence to be able to work with them. So I think that cultural intelligence is absolutely crucial to being able to have the sufficiently broad radar screen to be the kind of leader that sees where the world is going. I think that the second overwhelming reason to my mind is that, as we know, the world is increasingly run by cities. 75% of the world's population will live in cities. There are huge cities all over the world that are becoming much more important to some extent than countries, and they're actually quite good at working with each other in a way that countries often struggle to do. Those cities will be places that draw in talent from all over the world. And if you are a leader who has little cultural intelligence, I don't think you'll be an effective leader if you're operating within any of those cities. So I think cultural intelligence hits the mark on so many different fronts. And I think to some extent your question is interesting. You know, we're a global organization with people from all over the place. Well, yes, you may be, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your leaders have the cultural intelligence to lead it in a way so that you get the huge benefits of having people from everywhere. Have we got another question, Dave? Have we got a problem with the technology? Dave, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Sorry. So the next question we have is, what can be done to spread CQ more widely in society, with a particular focus on some of the leaders? So we had a question at the beginning of week 1, which was, who were some of the leaders in modern society who have developed cultural intelligence, and who are some that perhaps need to display it a little bit more? So what can be done in order to kind of help them spread, to acknowledge, to develop cultural intelligence going forward?
I think there are a mass of different things that can be done. And the truth is that things begin to happen as soon as you spot a need. Certainly at Common Purpose, one of the things we're pretty obsessed with is the fact that there's an opportunity to develop cultural intelligence in universities all over the world, where large numbers of nationalities group to study. Now, they you know, in London or in Singapore or in New York or in Chicago or in Johannesburg, you can have hundreds and hundreds of nationalities all gathering from all over the world to study there. And yet, the trouble is that when the students land to begin their studies, their first act is often to find other people like them and then stick alongside them. And they neither learn cultural intelligence from being alongside people from multiple different nationalities, nor do they learn cultural intelligence from the experience of living for a term, or a year, or even a number of years in a city that is oozing cultural intelligence from every single sidewalk. So we, are doing everything we can to put those students together and get them learning from each other and getting them out into the city so that they do learn from the city and the experience of doing that. I think that we want to do that to scale because there are 4 million students around the world who travel to study, and that number is increasing to 8 million over the next few years. So if you could get a step change in the amount of cultural intelligence young people get when they're at university, rather than sticking with their own, as all students seem to, well, there are some exceptions, but the mass majority do, you could probably get a shift. I think that, I'm speaking at a conference in Atlanta in February of international schools. Again, it's extraordinary when you look at the statistics that you have international schools that persuade people that their USP is that they're international, and then they bring people together from all over the world, and they sort of knock a single culture into them while they study together. You get large organizations, large global employers who recognize the need to recruit young talent from across the world and across society, and yet within a couple of years of being in that organization, they have sort of knocked their difference out of them, that young talent, and they've sort of joined the one single monoculture of that organization. I think there's lots of things that we can do on all those fronts to produce a generation that's better at it. But having said that, you can have a tremendously diverse team and still have leaders, often of my age, who are not very good at leading, who are short on cultural intelligence. In fact, don't even recognize the need for it and take the view that that everybody should be like them. I think my generation is going to be harder to persuade. Though things are changing, which I'm delighted by.
So we have a question a little bit similar to what we had in yesterday's stream, but it was how can we be certain to have leaders who are free from bias, who are able to do justice or to ensure that justice is done, especially when working with minority groups to promote equality and fairness in wider society?
Well, in principle, I don't believe that any human being is ever free of bias. I think they have them. The question is, do they have they figured them out and recognized them and seen the knots in their core and dealt with them? Sometimes you deal with them by moving them into your flex, because actually, when you really look at an issue, you realize that your views are based on prejudgment rather than judgment. But sometimes those biases are so deeply baked into you that you can't move them out of your core, in which case I think you concentrate on making them your problem rather than somebody else's. But whatever happens, people will always, I think, human beings have biases. The question is whether they're looking out for them and regard them as a problem that they have to deal with. I think my other slight problem with your question is we all get too good at identifying what other people should do better and not at what we ourselves should be doing better. And I think two thoughts: that if, those of us, and I suspect I have, been irritated through my life when people patronize me as a woman, and you get all furious and bad-tempered about it. And then having experienced that patronizing, I then go and patronize somebody else in a thoroughly unpleasant fashion and become just as much part of the problem as anybody else. I think you need to be looking out for yourself as a good starter. But I also believe, and believe it deeply, that we all have a responsibility too, to when we see a degree of cultural intolerance happening, not to make a joke of it or to walk past it, but to, on a reasonably regular basis, not every single time, because you may judge this is not the right time, but on almost all times, make some light or heavy point back so that you are pushing back on people rather than walking away. Equally, you know, sometimes you get so passionate that you lose sight of reality. I had a daughter who was disabled for a period, and I remember when she was applying for something, somebody definitely discriminated against her, and I absolutely lost it and screamed my head off, a destroyed person. So I whacked them to pieces. And I remember my daughter sitting there looking at me and saying, right, well, that guy's never going to speak to me again, are they? And I think sometimes you have to get your tone right, and you have to get your volume right, and you have to get your timing right. And I suspect I was particularly bad on tone, volume, and timing because I was fighting somebody else's battle. And in this case, as a mother with a daughter. But I think on the whole, you have to make sure that you control your own biases and aware of them, that you recognize that they will always exist, however much you think that they don't, but that you stand up in the presence of bias and say something and find a way of doing it so that you don't kill the situation entirely, but you make progress.
So we have a question from Judith, just following up from that slightly, which is, how does one really find my bias? What are the ways in which we can find?
How do you find your bias? By looking for it. Most people don't bother to look for them. And by listening to other people and developing sufficiently strong relationships with people, and not just people that you agree with, people you don't agree with, that they tell you, and they tell you true. I think fierce listening is an important skill. Concentrated listening and concentrated questioning, so that you encourage other people to say things to you. You know, many people talk about networks as being something that's about support, and we all need support networks occasionally, because you need loving and you need support and care sometimes, because life gets pretty tough. But I think you also need turbulence networks, people who will tell you what you don't want to hear. And I think when you are privileged enough to be given that kind of feedback, you need to listen pretty fiercely so that you hear what people are saying, and adjust, and look out for the bias. I think there's also a truth that of admitting it. You know, there are occasions when, on the whole, if I walk into a room, I will take a step forward towards people. Just occasionally people take, and I do too, you take a step back. Sometimes you're not even conscious of doing it. And I think you want to watch yourself for the moments where you intuitively take a step back. Because you may be able to find in there something that's a bias that's clouding your judgment and therefore preventing you from working with people who you don't have to agree with, you don't have to like, but often you have to work with them.
So our next question is around kind of experience and time. So we've talked a lot this week around the need to go out and experience. But as a leader, how do you ensure that you can make the time or create the time to be able to have these experiences?
I mean, we all have our own means of making sure that we get our priorities right and fit our priorities into things. And certainly, so long-term priorities, such as developing your cultural intelligence, can often be something that sort of slides when there are other more immediate things. I certainly have a sort of silly rule with myself that I will not go for a month without having, in my case, because I was brought up French, a meal a meal, a lunch usually, with somebody who will see the world from a completely different position from me, where there is no logical reason why I should meet them. There's no business to be done. There's no justification whatsoever for spending your incredibly tight time meeting them. And I think I make sure I do that at least once a month, and you're listening pretty hard. I think that it's worth having a look at, as I say, who you follow on Twitter and who you follow on whatever social media you follow, and make sure that you're not just listening to people who agree with you, but people who don't agree with you. I think you want to look at some of your habits, what you read, how do you inform yourself? Is it always in the same way, or are you varying it? I think there's all kinds of things that sort of push you out there to experience, but you're quite right. I think you have to build it into the diary.
So our next question is around a language and one country. So one of our learners has asked, so the question is, am I inadequate in our world because of my one country, one language background? What can I do to kind of overcome some of these issues?
Well, inadequate's a pretty tough word. I think you may not be inadequate. You might just have a slightly inbuilt disadvantage, which you need to counterbalance. But even that is useful, because most people who only speak one language and it's English think they have an advantage and behave in such a way. So the very fact that you recognize that it is a disadvantage puts you a few steps, I think, ahead. I would say, there's never there's never a moment in life when you can't start trying to struggle and learn another language. My son's just been in South Africa and can speak some very, very limited Xhosa, but even in itself, him trying to get his mouth around the shapes of a very, very different vocabulary it's useful, and it's the experience of stumbling and failing and finding it difficult. So maybe it's the experience of learning another language you need, rather than necessarily to be able to master another language. But I think you're well on your way that you're asking the question.
So our next question is coming back to one of our activities from week 2, which was looking at our week 2 entry in terms of what are some of the ways in which we can find what's core to us. And one question is there a story from your past that has been influential for you, Julia, in terms of finding what is core or what is flex for you?
Just to recap, anybody who might have joined recently, the reason I sound so awful and I'm here is because I'm at home with a very bad cold. So please forgive me if it sounds rather strange. This is my office. I can just put my arms out. And I work from here, and out of that window, I see trees. And trees are somehow a very important part of my core. In woods, especially British woods, you find trees that have been here hundreds of years and will still be here, I hope, hundreds of years after us. If you see bluebells in British woods, they're not here at this time of the year, but they'll be here around the spring. Bluebells, I don't know if you know, if you get a tapestry of bluebells on the floor of woods, that shows that they're prehistoric woods. It's somehow woods sort of keep you in perspective when you tend to forget just how unimportant you are. I find them immensely useful in rediscovering core and rediscovering bits of core that I like a lot. Perhaps another silly answer is that when I was writing the book about cultural intelligence, somebody at the beginning who knows me well and knows how devoted I was to my father said to me, "Oh, are you going to dedicate it to your father?" And I said, "No, I think dedications are a bit naff. I won't be doing that." And he wrote me a lovely email at the end when he'd read the book, and he said, "You didn't have to dedicate it to your father. He's all the way through." And certainly, I mean, Dave, I work with, a number of people I work with, I suspect they're all sick to death of all the bits of core that I quote that I stole from my father. And I suppose I literally stole from him because he knew a lot. Whether they're really, really mundane, practical things, he always used to say to me, he had a wonderful expression on business. He said, "In God we trust, everybody else in writing." So it's absolute to my core that till something's in writing, I don't really trust it. I always want something to be brought to writing, and the devil is in the detail of the writing, and that's pretty core to me. I would occasionally sign a deal based on a handshake, but my father baked that concept so deeply into me that in God we trust, everybody else in writing. But there's many a story that are about your past that reveal your core to you. Some of the stories of your past, they don't work well for you. I mean, I remember being brought up in another country. I as a very young age, I probably didn't realize some of the biases that had been baked into me at a young age. And in my early 20s, when I did a lot of work in London with North African communities, I began to realize that the little bit that was French in me meant that I always took a step back in the presence of anybody from North Africa. And ever since, that's one that it seemed to me was crucial to move from core into flex. And I've always done work in the Arab world and with North Africa, where I certainly have for the last 15, 20 years. Because I would never want that to come back baked into me ever again. But you discover things in your core that you need to move out. And you discover things in your core that actually, the truth is, you're very proud of them. They're fundamental to you. And some of them are very, very practical things, like how you sign a contract. And some of them are deep into your behaviors. And many of mine are born out of having an extraordinary father.
Sorry for the feedback. So our next question is around, we've been doing an exercise which is about one thing you're going to stop doing, one thing you're going to start doing, or one thing you need to continue doing as you keep going and in developing your cultural intelligence. So we've had a few questions seeing what your three might be.
My three?
Yes.
Is that the question, Dave?
Yes.
So remind me, what I'm going to stop doing.
What you're going to stop doing, start doing, and continue to do.
What am I going to stop doing? I suppose the list is so long, and the embarrassment is that some of them have been on for a long time, and I'm failing to stop doing them. Perhaps stop feeling so. When anybody gets very intellectual, that sort of heavy academic intellectual stuff tends to absolutely turn me off, and I tend to either go to sleep or sort of walk away. And I think that shows a degree of bias in me that's idiotic. And I would like to be better at getting best out of the deeply thoughtful world. I am an action person. I'll jump to action immediately, often based on intuition and without yet the full facts. And I would prefer to be better at balancing a sort of slightly more intellectual element to it. So that would be drop. To gain, I think because I'm 57, I think I'm probably more IT literate than many people. I Twitter. I use my iPad. It's just an extension of my arm. And I think I understand some of the issues of the internet, but it's moving at such a speed, and I have no intention of getting left behind from the generation for whom it is not a struggle, it's a natural thing. So I'd like to carry on being ambitious on use of technology, and finding ways of making it add value rather than becoming somebody who won't adopt new methods. So that one was drop, one was gain, and what was the third one? I can't remember, Dave.
Continue.
Continue. Well, I mean, the silly one is that I've always signed all my emails, all my letters, "Love, Julia," and many people tell me that now that I've grown up and now that I'm dealing with very senior people in the world, I've got to stop doing this, and that it's a sort of silly habit that's sort of childish, and I really should stop doing it. And then other people tell me that the day I stop writing "Love, Julia" to kings and emirs and prime ministers and chairmen of companies, that I will have lost the plot, because actually it's fundamental to me, and that actually "Love, Julia" at the end of an email makes everybody smile and remember that it's me and forgive me for it. I don't know which one, so I suspect I will continue to question myself as to whether it should be at the bottom of an email "Love, Julia" or not. And I think I've got that issue under review. Forgive the coughing.
So we have our next question from Ibrahim, who has mentioned he's a student, and it's quite interesting in terms of he will be going studying in a new country in the new year, where it's some place that he hasn't visited, hasn't been before, but it's an exciting opportunity for him, and he's wondering about what are some of the quick wins or the best ways to kind of help him as he moves into a new place, and he has to work with people who are very different to him, and how he, in terms of how he acclimatizes. Is there any advice that you could offer?
Ibrahim, it's an interesting one, and I think there's so much advice before you go. Make sure that make sure you've done a bit of homework, and from all kinds of different angles. Research is so easy, but look at your city from every different angle. The city that you're going to go and study in. I mean, I'm in Chicago in 10 days' time. I've been to Chicago for many years, so I've been reading as much as I can about some of the big issues going on at the moment. The big issue around the police chief and what happened last year on a horrible attack. Trying to figure out who the mayor is. He was obviously an interesting person. Reading some of his blogs and listening to some of his speeches. I think listening to some voices within the city before you go, and it's not too difficult to do. I think when you arrive, the temptation is to settle too quickly, to join clubs that make you feel comfortable and at home. I think it's probably quite important to feel deeply not at home for quite a long time, because I think in the unfamiliar, the temptation is to settle, and to settle with people that you know or that are like you. And I think that you need to push out and do unusual things. If you are a sportsman, then do something in the arts. And if you're going to do something in the arts, make sure it's something that's not a form of arts that you know anything about. Push yourself to try things that are unfamiliar. And I suppose the last one is I mean, I don't know you, but I am teetotal. I've never drunk ever in my life for a multitude of different reasons. But I am immensely quick to judge people who drink a lot. Truth is, I get quite disgusted, particularly, to be honest, with women who drink a lot. And it turns me off. And I think I failed to make some friends. And certainly, if I look back, I went to the LSE many years ago. And I think in those early weeks, I sort of dismissed quite a lot of people based on the fact that they had habits that I didn't have, and in this case, drinking. I think sometimes you hold quite strong views, and you need to just you don't have to undermine your own core. You don't have to drink to get on with people who drink. And you don't have to be frightened that just because you're with people who drink, you're going to start drinking. It never happened to me. But I think you do need to be with people who do things very differently from you, and give them a moment to reveal themselves enough to you that you discover, actually, I could get on with this person. It'd be quite interesting.
So we just have about 5 more minutes left, so we've time for one or two more questions. So our next question is from Irina, and she asks, in what situations have you found that people have made the most mistakes in relation to their core and flex?
I think I make most of my mistakes on core and flex when I am in a minority, because I don't think I've ever been more British than in situations where I was the only person who was British there. I don't think I've ever been more aggressively a woman than in situations where I'm completely surrounded on a board by men and I'm the only woman there. I think I make my judgments, I make the biggest mistakes when I over-respond to those situations. And I get confused on core and flex, and sort of, I get a little bit chaotic, and certainly too noisy and too passionate and too strident and too different. But I think everybody's different. But certainly that's when I get at my worst and where I lose sight of what's core and flex.
Thank you. Our next question is coming back to something we discussed in week 3, which was around kind of calibrating our flex. And we talked a bit about the use of language, humor, adapting to local ways, dressing and greeting. And James was wondering, what are some of the other areas that you think people struggle with as they try to kind of calibrate and adapt their flex?
I think one I was coming across the other day, as someone reminded me of it, I was in a meeting with some US and some Japanese people, and the meeting came to a point where there was a long pause, and it was intriguing that everybody from the US assumed that the long pause was a symbol of disagreement, and everybody from Japan thought that a long pause was a symbol of agreement. And in a funny way, I think silence is quite an interesting one. That in different parts of the world, silence has different meanings, and perhaps noise. You know, if you look at the common purpose programs where you've got people from cultures all over the world, I try very hard not to, but the temptation is to point out to the young Westerners that if they just shut up for a minute, somebody from the developing world might say something quite profound. But if the Westerners carry on transmitting, they won't, either through politeness or through humility or through peacefulness or through whatever. There is a very big difference. And on the whole, it would be good if Westerners made less noise. I go back to my father. As my father used to say to me, switch the wireless. It shows how long ago he said this. Switch the wireless from transmit to receive a little bit more often.
So we're unfortunately coming up to the end of our time. So we just have one final question, and quite a big one in a sense, and it comes from Chinonso, who asks, why do you think people can feel superior or inferior to others in the world today?
I honestly don't know the answer to it. I'm not sure it's people. I think it's we. We all do. Um, I suppose it's history. I suppose it's culture. I suppose it's surroundings. Sometimes it's arrogance. Sometimes it's lack of confidence. Sometimes it's too much confidence. But it's pretty wicked stuff. And if you can, on the whole, develop sufficient cultural intelligence that you can meet people at the same level and give them that sense too, I think you have an enormous amount of advantage in the world, because human beings do respect the respect you're giving them if you meet on equal terms. But I honestly don't know the answer to your question. But keep on going. It's one of the reasons why cultural intelligence is needed a lot in the world, to actually spot that the person whom you're meeting is not trying to be rude or clipped or unfriendly. It's just that they feel superior or inferior to you, and you've got to deal with that.
Thank you, Julia. So unfortunately, we've come to the end of our session today, and thank you everyone for joining us. But just before we do, I know we just want to say just one or two quick things in terms of what's coming next on the final steps as we come to the end of our first cultural intelligence MOOC, and just some opportunities in terms of continuing your learning ahead as well.
Yes, I think, as you know, this is the first, as I say, please forgive the voice, it really is cracking now. This is the first MOOC that we've ever done, Common Purpose has ever done, and it's in partnership, which has been a very pleasant experience working in partnership with FutureLearn to do it. Most of the programs that we run are face-to-face, and when people complete those programs, they become alumni of Common Purpose, and there's quite a big community of alumni of Common Purpose around the world, sort of in excess of 50,000. So if you've finished most of this MOOC, I think it's 50% of the actions, and you'll sign up to using your newly acquired cultural intelligence to work with people from 50,000 places across the world. We'd be delighted if you became Common Purpose alumni and benefited from so doing. I think that there's a link that shows you how to go about applying, and we'd be absolutely delighted to welcome you. If you're a student thinking about some of the questions, you might want to immediately, wherever you're studying, and that's a very good point, wherever you're moving to study, have a look on the Common Purpose website, because you may find that in that city we run what we call Global Leader Experiences, which is a program for the students in the city. And that is sponsored, so you're very welcome to go on it and to apply. And I would recommend it as an extraordinary experience. You'll be among students from across the world. But we welcome all new Common Purpose alumni, and thank you very, very much for doing this MOOC. Thank you for tolerating my bad voice this morning. and I wish you well on your cultural intelligence journey.
Thank you, Julia. And again, thank you everyone for joining us. A recording of this session will be made available on the course step. So do have a look out for that. Keep feeding in your comments, your discussion, just a couple more days. But again, the content will be accessible for you for the next couple of weeks as well. So keep feeding in, really enjoying your discussions and your comments. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you again soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Dave.